Well, hello there. Better late than never. I'm about 3 or 4 minutes late going on today. A few little technical snafus, signing on with Wi Fi and so forth. But I'm here and thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. Let me check here, get set up for chat. There we are. Let your comments come in. Um, Busy day working on a lot of projects right now, working on some art consignments for some pieces. I'm studying for some classes, uh, housework, laundry, what have you. But here I am. And, I've learned not to over prepare for when I do this show because it's fun. It's fun. You guys are friends. This is almost like doing a Zoom chat or something. Granted, it's one sided because I can't hear you other than your comments, but I can at least talk. And I didn't have a chance to really prepare, but then I have a whole bunch of notes here that I was going to do last week. Last week, I did sort of a tribute to Judy Garland because of her birthday, what would have been her 102nd. And I had a lot of personal stories, not necessarily my personal stories, but stories that had been told to me by friends who did know her. So they were secondhand, but personal in that respect, and stories that often don't get told. So thankfully, the show is archived. You want to see it last week because it's some really good stuff about our beloved Judy. And so I have this whole page of notes. I always at least have some things to refer to talk about. And last week I thought I would talk a little about Judy and then talk about the Wizard of Oz, the making of it. And I ended up using my whole 30 minutes plus just telling all the Judy stories. I thought, well, great, I got stuff for this week now. Let's see. So I just have rough things here, maybe telling you some things you already know, or maybe you don't know. But for example, Judy Garland was not the first choice to play Dorothy. Some have argued otherwise, because I think that's because there were so many executives at MGM really rooting for this young woman. She signed with MGM at the age of 13. Like most great stars, initially nobody knew what to do with her. Here was this little girl, rather plain looking at the time, but with this magnificent voice. You listen to recordings of Judy at that time, the voice was already there. It was just astounding. You look at pictures of Judy, her eyes, it was there. I've always thought of Judy Garland as a combination of 500,000 watts of electricity combined with some of the most fragile vulnerability I think we've ever seen in a star. And those two things together, those two polarities, she was a classic Gemini. Those two polarities came together. It was just so magnetic and so electrifying. It made her real life, her personal life, incredibly difficult. But as a performer, what a gift she brought to us. So there were people early on who recognized that in her, where there were plenty who did not. But there were enough influential people at MGM who were rooting for Judy, and right from the beginning begged Louis B. Mayer to buy the rights to The Wizard of Oz for Judy. It was a time where it was considered fantasy, fairy tale type movies like that were not considered very marketable. But Walt Disney broke the trend with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was the first ever feature-length animated film. And it went on for the day. In 1930, up until Gone with the Wind, it became the #1 box office draw of all time. It was huge. So yes, studios were now scrambling to come up with their own fairy tale movie. And some people at MGM thought The Wizard of Oz would be just perfect, to get out the Technicolor and pull out the stops with all the special effects and everything. But obviously, they had to be very careful on who they had as their leading lady. And the reigning box office champ at the time, the number one box office draw at the time, was a little girl named Shirley Temple. She was bigger than Clark Gable, Jean Harlow, Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford. She was the number one box office draw. So it was only natural Louis B. Mayer would want to borrow Shirley Temple for this very expensive prestige project, which involved a little girl named Dorothy. You know, they of course had to adapt it for Judy as a teenager, but it was written for a little girl. So it's thought Shirley Temple would just be perfect for this. And there was a deal where MGM Shirley was under contract to 20th Century Fox. And they weren't about to loan her out. She was too valuable. But MGM's two biggest stars at the time were Clark Gable and Jean Harlow. And 20th Century Fox agreed to loan out Shirley Temple on the condition MGM loaned both of those stars to 20th Century Fox to do a film called In Old Chicago, which ended up being done with Tyrone Power and Alice Faye, but it was planned for Clark Gable and Jean Harlow. And then Jean Harlow tragically died. Deal fell through. And also, it was said that Shirley Temple, there was like a little private meeting where they had her sing some of the songs, you know, just to kind of test the waters a little. And it just was clear Shirley was not up to snuff. She was not up to the level that was going to be needed for the demands of this role. You know, it was going to take someone like Judy. And, you know, I have a friend who lives in San Francisco, and he was very close with Shirley Temple Black at the time, you know, adult Shirley. This was near the final years of her life. They became very close friends. And he asked her the question, is it true? Is it true that you were to be the original choice for Dorothy? And she said, yes, it's absolutely true. And I want you to know that's the greatest disappointment of my entire film career, that I did not get that role. I wanted it. I wanted it so badly. And they wanted me. But it just, Shirley said, but you know what? It was meant to be Judy's role. Judy was the only person in the world who could have played that role. And this is coming from Shirley herself, I could not have brought to that role the dimensions she brought to it. She was born to play the role. So I thought that was very generous of Shirley Temple to say. Also, Deanna Durbin was under consideration, but only briefly. It was Judy's role, and thank goodness she got it, because she was born to play Dorothy. And you may not know this, but the original choice for the wizard was W.C. Fields. Now, I could see that. You know, I'm Oz. Can't you see W.C. Fields' big face behind the curtain and the flames? I think he would have been just perfect for the role, but I understand he wanted too much money. I think he wanted top billing. He wanted it beefed up so it'd be more about his role, the wizard. You know, it was called The Wizard of Oz, but anyway, it went to Frank Morgan instead, who was under contract to MGM. And of course, Frank Morgan, again, was born to play that role, or we should say roles, because he played different characters in the film. And of course, he was the Wizard of Oz. Margaret Hamilton, she was born to play that role, but she wasn't the first choice. Originally, the role was conceived as a beautiful, glamorous witch, kind of like the evil queen in Snow White. And it was Gail Sondergaard who was going to play the role. And I've seen a still of her where she actually had a black sequined gown and a witch's hat that was done up in black sequins. And of course, she was all made up, very glamorous. And well, some people came to their senses and thought, no, 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 no. We can't have the witch be glamorous. And then they tried to make Gail look ugly. They put the hook nose on her and the chin and everything. And I think Gail was not happy, and she bowed out. And Margaret Hamilton, a wonderful character actress named Margaret Hamilton, who had only a few years earlier been a kindergarten teacher, realized she was just a gentle, sweet woman who loved children. And her agent called her and she said, Oh, I've always loved that book. I've read it to children in my classes. What role do you want me to play? And the agent said, the witch. And then he, to add insult to injury, what else? Margaret loved to tell that story. And, Margaret, I've told this story about her. Actually, I'll tell this first. She was a very sweet woman in real life. She and Judy Garland actually had a close friendship making that movie. And Judy said that Margaret Hamilton was very motherly to her and very nurturing. So it's interesting to have that polarity. You have on screen the sinister, wicked witch of the West and Dorothy terrified of her. And in real life, they loved each other, and it was very gentle, very sweet, very nurturing. But Margaret Hamilton I'm going to tell about Buddy Ebsen also. 2 people got seriously injured on that film, but Margaret Hamilton, the big scene, her big scene, kill my sister, and I'll get you and your little dog too, and all that. And anyway, when she disappears in the big burst of fire, that big fireball, as an elevator, there was a trap door on the soundstage, and an elevator slowly lowered her down as the ball of flame came up. Well, on something like the second or third take, she got badly burned. She got 2nd and 3rd degree burns, and she had that green makeup on with a copper base, which is extremely toxic. And the makeup artist was on the set just horrified, because he knew how poisonous that makeup was. And he had a bottle of alcohol and swabs and just started swabbing her with alcohol. And poor Margaret Hamilton was screaming and crying in agony because that alcohol was burning her skin. But it was the only way to get the makeup off of her. And she said it was just torturous as they had to take it off of her burned skin. And then she said MGM did not so much as offer to have a driver take her home. She had to drive herself home. And she couldn't go back to work for 5 weeks because she had to heal from her burns. But she did not sue because she knew, they were saying, you've got a lawsuit here. Your safety was not being protected. And she said, no, I will never work again if I do that. I'll get blackballed. And she was right. Studios would do that in those days. So anyway, that happened. And also Buddy Ebsen, played Jed Clampett on the Beverly Hillbillies. And if you've ever seen any of his movies from the 1930s, he was a very talented dancer. Originally, it was a Broadway dancer. And he was going to play the Tin Man. Only the silver makeup, they were actually putting powder on him, like a silver dusting powder. Well, I think he filmed about 2 weeks worth of footage, but it was somewhere toward the end. He'd been breathing in all of that silver dust powder. And one night he couldn't breathe. He could not breathe, and he had to be rushed in an ambulance to the hospital, and it was a long, tedious recovery. And of course, he had to bow out of the movie, and he was replaced by Jack Haley. And the makeup artist, just ever so quietly, hey Pam, hi Ward, thank you for joining, ever so quietly changed the makeup to more of a liquid-based foundation type of thing, not a powder where it could be smoothed on like a pancake, to eliminate the problem of inhaling that silver powder into his lungs. So and I don't think they even told Jack Haley the real reason Buddy Ebsen had bowed out in the movie. And something, because I always work in a Lucy story here, a Lucille Ball story. This is going to be real quick here. But at the time, Jack Haley was filming The Wizard of Oz, because they started that filming in the latter part of 1938 into spring of 1939. Jack Haley, in the latter part of 1938, was doing a radio variety show called The Wonder Show. And one of his regulars on the show was a young contract actress at RKO named Lucille Ball. So Lucy was working with Jack Haley, the Tin Man, at the time he was making the movie. And if you want to put a little more Lucy lore into this, Gale Gordon, and of course, I'm sure you know, Gale Gordon was, of course, Mr. Mooney on the Lucy Show, Uncle Harry on Here's Lucy, even Lucy's final show, Life with Lucy, she was Curtis. In this one, he was her brother-in-law. Well, actually, he was her brother-in-law in Here's Lucy, too. They got a lot of mileage out of that. But it's interesting. Gale Gordon is the one actor who was on every single one of Lucille Ball's broadcast series, if you want to count radio and television. Gale Gordon was on The Wonder Show with Lucille Ball, Jack Haley's show. They later did a show called My Favorite Husband, which was the basis for I Love Lucy. Gale Gordon was a regular on that. I Love Lucy, Gale Gordon only guest starred a handful of times. Mr. Littlefield, the nightclub owner, but then Lucy Show, Here's Lucy, Life with Lucy. So they had a partnership that ran from 1938 to 1986. 48 years. Amazing. So anyway, that's going to be my Lucy story today, but that's a kind of a cute way to work it in with The Wizard of Oz and Jack Haley. And let's see here. George Cukor was going to direct the film originally. And he was aboard during those first 2 weeks before he bowed out. Buddy Ebsen bowed out. But George Cukor made some crucial changes. I don't think that footage survives anymore. I wish it did, but apparently it doesn't, where we got Buddy Ebsen as the Tin Man. But it's interesting because originally Judy Garland, Dorothy, was wearing this very elaborate blonde wig with all these ringlets and curls. I mean, they did almost a baby doll makeup on her, and the ribbon in the hair and the curls. And George Cukor said, no, let's make Dorothy down to earth, simple and basic. Let's make her wholesome. He toned her down. He took it back to Judy's natural brown hair. Of course, obviously she was wearing hair pieces. We all know that for the pigtails, but nonetheless, he toned down the makeup, the way her costume, everything. And of course, it was the perfect decision because everything in that movie is perfect. And Dorothy is perfect just as she is in that movie. And that came from George Cukor. Let's see, the Munchkins, which was quite incredible, rounding up well over 100 authentic midgets, dwarfs and midgets. And they did mix in some children also, but put them more or less in the background. But it was quite something for all those costumes. The great Adrian, who did costumes for Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford and Harlow, some of the most beautiful couture we've ever seen in 1930s cinema. Well, he did all the costumes for The Wizard of Oz, and that included, hi Joyce, included all of those Munchkin outfits. And you watch the movie, it is just, I think it's just breathtaking. This was the era before digital CGI and all this. All of this had to be done by hand. All those costumes. But anyway, they rounded up all those midgets. And I think, forget how they were billed in the movie, like the Mighty Munchkin Singers, or I don't know, it was some ridiculous name they were given. But there were stories that they could get quite rowdy. Judy herself claimed that one of the Munchkins kept hitting up on her, trying to ask her out on a date, and she had to keep politely refusing him. And it's said at the hotel, and that hotel still stands in Culver City. I've been to it. It's been said that they got quite drunk and rowdy, and there's stories of Munchkins swinging from the hanging light fixtures and passing out on the floor and on the steps and stuff. I mean, oh, it's just what a thought. What a thought that is. And what else do I have in my notes here? Bert Lahr, who was just so perfect to play the Cowardly Lion. I read Ethel Merman's autobiography, and it was in 1939, the same year that The Wizard of Oz came out. She and Bert Lahr did a Broadway show, a Broadway musical together called Du Barry Was a Lady. Okay, I'm going to work in some more Lucy here. Lucille Ball did the movie version of Du Barry Was a Lady. But anyway, Ethel wrote in her book that she had never worked with a performer with more severe stage fright. She said it never got better. Every single night he went out there, he was scared to death, like trembling, shaking. Ethel, I can't go on. I can't go out there. I can't there. And then Ethel be like, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Come on, come on. And then she said they'd be out there on stage performing, and well, she'd be doing her Ethel Merman thing. Bert Lahr would be going, Ethel, I'm going to faint. I'm going to faint. And then when he started to sing, Ethel go, no, you're not. You're not going to faint. You're not going to faint. I only bring this up because Bert Lahr brought such sincere vulnerability to that character. That cowardness, for want of a better word, that insecurity in himself, that was really Bert Lahr. That's who he was. And it's very interesting to watch The Wizard of Oz on a big movie screen. I've seen it several times in a theater. One time I saw it in IMAX, 5 stories high, crystal clear print that looked like it could have been filmed yesterday, not 80 some years ago. But anyway, when you see the movie on a big screen, that opening scene with the Cowardly Lion, where Dorothy slaps him, what did you do that for? And he starts crying. He wasn't faking it. You watch it on a big screen, real tears were running out of his eyes down. I say his face, that was obviously a mask, but he was crying real tears. He was investing of himself into that. And, you know, I know from when I studied acting with Dee Wallace, she always taught us you can never lie to the camera. Audiences will know when you're not authentic, you're not true, you're not there. Well, you watch The Wizard of Oz. I can't think of a movie that has more heart. And it's because everybody just treated those roles so seriously. They didn't treat them like two-dimensional cartoon characters, which they easily could have done. No, those were multi-dimensional. Bert Lahr crying. I was even thinking Jack Haley as the Tin Man, the way Victor Fleming, the director, I'll get to Victor Fleming in a moment, but yes, Dee Wallace Stone, Kate. Yes, she was my acting teacher for a number of years. Victor Fleming had a young child, and he would read bedtime stories, in that wonderful voice, like you talk to a child. And he said, he directed Jack Haley, I want you to say all your lines like you're reading a bedtime story. Watch for it. It's very sweet. And, an interesting dimension about Ray Bolger and the Scarecrow. Well, first of all, Ray Bolger was given the role of the Tin Man. And he said, no, I want to be the Scarecrow. I'm the Scarecrow. And he was so right. And so he persuaded the studio to let him have that role instead of the Tin Man. And he was, again, just born to play the part. And the makeup was so intricate, that burlap sack he had glued to his skin, so much so he had permanent indentations in his face for the rest of his life little, it created scar tissue from that. And the makeup was so elaborate, they had trouble eating. They had to, in the commissary, it was said it was so disgusting. They were trying to eat and food running down and everything, and people were complaining. It was requested that they eat their lunch in their dressing rooms. But more so, they had to have assistants to feed them. This includes Margaret Hamilton, because she had her hands, everything painted green. So she had to have an assistant. They had to have people like take their sandwiches and break up into little pieces and feed them, or spoon soup in their mouths. That was the only way and some days they could just do liquids because of that makeup. And it was very uncomfortable. This was one of the first Technicolor movies. And Technicolor in those days involved 3 strips of film in a camera. To capture the primary colors of red, yellow, and blue. And then they were sandwiched together and that's how you got your print. It was beautiful. You watch old Technicolor, it is so rich and dynamic. And it's because you had those 3 individual negatives. But because you had 3 negatives in a camera, you had to have intense light on a set. And it was not unusual for a Technicolor set to get over 100 degrees. So the actors were just miserable, and no one more so than Burt Lahr, because his costume was made out of a real lion skin, and it was said to weigh almost 90 pounds. The costume still exists. I've seen it. It was up for auction one year, I think at Christie's. I could be wrong on that. And I believe it went for well over $1 million. They had it in a beautiful plexiglass case, and they got Burt Lahr's son, who looked just like his father, so they could do a mask. They had to recreate the mask so they could have that with the costume. So they used Burt Lahr's son for that. Also, the Scarecrow costume still exists. I've seen that in the Smithsonian. And there are actually several versions of Dorothy's gingham dress. And also the versions that were made for Technicolor, the blue, we know. The beginning sequences, the black and white sepia, that was a sepia-toned print dress. We had some yellow in it because that's what photographed better on black and white film. But there's several of those in existence. There were 6 pairs of the ruby slippers that were made. That's what's believed. There might have been more, but it's known, it's documented. There were 6 pairs of ruby slippers, and there are 4 pairs in known existence today. That's a whole other story. I can tell what happened to each pair of the ruby slippers. Nonetheless, to say they're very valuable, and they are each worth well over $1 million. Let's see here. What else am I going to tell here? Billy Burke, who played Glenda. Billy Burke had been married to the great showman Florence Ziegfeld. She was Mrs. Ziegfeld. And Billy Burke, around the early part of the 1900s, the 19-teens into the 20s, had been a beautiful, beautiful ingenue on Broadway. Oh, she was stunning. And after her husband died in 1932, it was the height of the Depression, and he had left her somewhat destitute. He lost a lot of his money in the stock market, and she knew she had to go back to work. And she decided to come out to Hollywood and be a character actress. At this point, she was well into her 40s, and she had a pretty good streak. One of her first films was with Katharine Hepburn and John Barrymore, A Bill of Divorcement in 1932. She was in the Topper movies. soon cast her as this very flighty, kind of society matron, kind of like a Mrs. Howell type. And I think it was a little difficult for her, having been the beautiful ingenue, playing these type of middle-aged, flighty, silly roles. But she was delighted when she was offered the role of Glinda, the Good Witch of the North. Now, here's a little bit of trivia for you. They once toyed with the idea of Fanny Brice. They were going to make Glinda kind of funny. And of course, Fanny Brice had been one of the great Ziegfeld stars. And if you know your Barbra Streisand history, Barbra Streisand won an Oscar playing her in the movies Funny Girl and Funny Lady. So Fanny Brice was considered, but it went to Billie Burke. And Billie Burke was 54 years old at the time. She looks like an ingenue in her 20s. I think they gave her a little adhesive tape facelift under the wig and everything, but it worked. It worked. And Billie Burke said of all of her film roles, that was her favorite because that was the one time on film she got to be an ingenue like she was on Broadway. So it's very sweet. And also, I guess in closing, I'll talk about how amazing that movie was, and that it was like 70 years before there was digital CGI. And I think the special effects in that movie rival anything today. That cyclone was done all on a sound stage. That wasn't even rear projection. That was like a 30, 40 feet, that the cyclone was bound muslin, hanging 30, 40 feet, and they were moving it around, and they had massive fans, and they had branches and dirt and things blowing out, and it's believable. It's believable. You believe Dorothy's caught in that cyclone, and Annie Ann's going, Dorothy, calling to her, and the way they lit it and the dark clouds. And I just marvel every time I watch it at how well it is done. And I watch so many of the other special effects throughout the movie. And I think what really makes it work, even when there are few, maybe one little moment like those flying monkeys where they have the little model figures flying out, those look just a little on the fake side. But some of those other sequences, like where the monkeys are on, the actors playing the monkeys are on wires and they're flying down and swooping off and they grab Dorothy. I've talked to a lot of people who said that terrified them as a child because it was so believable. But the most important thing about The Wizard of Oz, it has a soul. It has heart. And I also love all of the metaphors in it, the metaphysical aspects, the chakra colors, the yellow brick road, the emerald city, the ruby slippers. And of course, the ruby slippers in the book were silver. The reason they were made ruby is because it looked better in Technicolor. The red ruby slippers, that was the main reason. But that ending where she's saying goodbye to everyone, admit it. Don't you cry at the end of that? No matter how many times you've seen it, because it's just so full of heart. And there's a little bit of trivia there. You know, when she says goodbye, and then to the scarecrow, Dorothy says, I'm going to miss you most of all. And someone's like, huh? Why are you going to miss him the most? Well, there originally was a subplot in the black and white sequence where the farmhand, what was his name? Hunk? Was that it? I'm sorry. Someone's going to call me on this. I may have gotten the wrong name. But Dorothy and the farmhand had a little bit of an infatuation with each other. So they were going to carry that over into the movie, where there was just ever so much of a little more of affection between the two of them. And she was going to say, I'm going to miss you most of all. Let's see. I'm looking here, comments here. Yeah, award. Yeah, the movie Cyclone is on par with contemporary videos of tornadoes on the Weather Channel. Yeah, they did their homework. They did their research. I mean, to me, The Wizard of Oz, because any movie is a great collaborative effort. So to have so much talent come together and to come together in sync the way it did to make what is, in my opinion, the closest thing we have ever had to a perfect movie. I know that's open for discussion and debate, but I think it comes as close as any movie ever did. So anyway, this is this is my show for today. I got to talk about Judy Garland last week. Today, it was a chance to tell some Wizard of Oz stories. I could go on about the ruby slippers, what happened to each of those. I may save that for another show since I'm almost at the, what am I, 35-minute point now? So I think I'm going to wrap this up for right now. I want to thank you all so much for joining me. It means so much, your support. And I love getting your comments, your messages. I've a little behind on answering people, so I hope you'll forgive me, but I'll get back to you one way or the other. I thank you for watching this. Please like and subscribe to my channel, Chuck's Captivating Chronicles, where I tell lots of old Hollywood stories and I tell Lucille Ball, I Love Lucy stories and talk about life. And so join me. And thank you for joining me right now. And I'll see you here next Monday. Bye.